Hello, my name is Michel Noah. As you can see, I'm the head of coach development and also the technical advisor for Paradressage at USEF, which is the United States Equestrian Federation. And it's my pleasure to give you today an insight on what we do, but what Paradressage is in the US primarily, a little bit also in the world, because our federation works closely together with the International Federation in Switzerland, which is called the FEI, which is the Fédération Équestre Internationale. So those two governing bodies are working closely. So, I will have something to mention about it once in a while. So national federation, home federation is USEF, and the international body is FEI. So let's just have a start of what we are going to discuss today. We're going to look at Paradressage. What is Paradressage? Most of you know, but we're just going to have a little bit of a talk on that one. What some of the rules and structure are, what to look in training for a facility and a trainer, for instance.
Stop. Sorry.
Okay.
One.
So today we're going to have a little look at what is Paradressage, what the rules and structure are, and we're not going to go in great depth, but I'm going to try to give you an insight of the main components of what you should know before you get started. What to look for a training facility and also a trainer, that's also very important to get started. And what type of horse is appropriate for training, both international and national. What is the best scenario for you to find that horse, and what are you looking for a horse, depending on what you are going to be doing. So, Paradressage competitions. Let's do that one again.
Sorry, I was trying
to.
Well, whatever, if you want a chair.
One.
So let's have a look of what we are going to be looking at today. So first, we're just going to have a brief chat about Paradressage. What is Paradressage? I know some of you guys know what it is, but we're still going to discuss it a little bit. A brief outlook as well on rules and structure. What to look for in a training facility and a trainer. We'll have a discussion on that. And what type of horse is appropriate for what you're going to be doing. I mean, of course, some of you guys might have the potential to start quicker into the international bubble, but most of you, it won't be the case. But we look at horses that are suitable for either. And then Paradressage competitions and what are your options. So, Paradressage, as you can see, is dressage for riders with an eligible permanent physical and or visual impairment, a deficiency in or loss of body function or structure as defined by the FEI par Equestrian Dressage Classification Manual. So remember, the FEI is our international body, that is the governing body of all federations in the world, and every federation sort of relies on their rules. They're sort of governing us to what it should be. And USEF, the United States Equestrian Federation, is a domestic federation, and they work very closely with the FEI. So classification is all related to that page there. It's an important thing to know. It's going to be measurable, as it says there. One thing you have to remember is that you cannot compete if you are not classified, and that's something to really remember throughout that presentation today. So, when we have people coming to us to get started, we have to remind them, get your classification. It's a big word, but it's the only way to have judges putting you in sort of categories, so to speak, because that's what classification is about. You all have different levels of disability, and it wouldn't be fair that somebody who's fully able with 4 limbs would compete against somebody else who's actually very, disabled with a sense of being a strong amputee. So obviously we put people in categories so that it's fair competition. It's really what the aim is about. So just remember, you have to get that done. Can you do both Paradressage and dressage? Well, of course, you can do that. We'll have a little look at what it entails. It is about having a dispensation certificate. It's a bit of a big word, but if you want to compete in dressage let's say even a test of choice class or a normal dressage class. It could be a first level or second level class. You're going to have that dispensation certificate through USCF. But again, it is the same. You can't have that unless you classify it. So it swings around back to that. So, but what it really means is that if you don't have access to a par dressage, so to speak, competition, then you can still go to your local dressage show and participate in a class with that dispensation certificate. And it is a question of having a list of all your words. So can you do both par dressage and dressage? The answer is yes, but there's a little thing to discuss there, which is your dispensation certificate. If you have the use of compensating aids, and it's probably a big word because you've not been there yet and it's all about classification. In par dressage you will often use compensating aids. They must be listed on your dispensation certificate. So if you want to find a show where you can compete with dressage riders, you need that dispensation certificate with your compensating aids. That's really what it's all about. Again, it is something that can be at first glance complicated, but if you get in touch with Youssef, with our Youssef, par dressage manager,
You're coming too far forward now.
She's never happy. Ready?
Yep.
So, can you do both par dressage and dressage? Yes. And why do we ask that question? Well, basically, you might live in any part of the country where there's very little access to a par dressage competition. So dressage is there to give you an option to compete. But, of course, you cannot just go there as a par rider. You will need a compensation certificate, as listed there, so that it can list your compensating aids, because most riders in par dressage would have some sort of a list with compensating aids. So yes, you can go into dressage, but you need that USCF dispensation certificate. And it doesn't work without, again, that classification. So you can't have it unless you classify. It just swings around to that. It is an advantage because you can be somewhere where there's little access to par dressage competition, but you've got that option that you can compete. Remember classification, you cannot compete without it. So let's have a look at the pathways in par dressage. How do we channel in? So, as a newbie, I call it, you're going to be called what we call an emerging rider, so that you're starting at the base of that pyramid. But there again, as you can see on the board, you have to apply for classification and get your grade. So grade is another big word for some of you that don't really know what it is. We've got in par dressage 5 grades, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The lower grades are considered being 1, 2, 3, and the higher grades are considered to be 4 and 5. In terms of what's in the grade, if we look at the actual paces of the horses, in grade 1, riders are going to be walking, essentially. It gets a little bit more complicated because there are things you can do or cannot do in the warm-up. But basically in the competition arena, in grade 1 you walk, in grade 2 you walk and trot, and in grade 3 you also walk and trot, but you can use some canter in the freestyle in grade 3. So that's the difference. Then what I call the high grades, grade 4 and 5, they have an introduction of collection of both walk and trot, which means they also have extensions. So when you have collection in dressage, you often have extensions, and that's very specific to grade 4 and 5. And we'll discuss that with the horses because it can actually affect what type of horse you need when you're actually competing in grade 4 and 5. So you're new, you apply for your classification, and you get your grade. That's the start. There's no par dressage without those two components. So you begin working towards emerging, and then you have to learn the novice test, and you qualify for USCF Emerging Pathway Program. So that's the start of the channel. But before that, most of you will ask, what do I have to do to get classified? Well, you just get in touch with your federation, which is USCF, and then our programs manager will just get you started. You would have heard that we have got also international classification, but I think at your stage it's not going to concern you. You need to get a national classification. There are exceptions to that. You might be, let's say, an advanced dressage rider. You've had an accident. You've recovered from the accident, but you've become a par dressage rider. You've got your classification, but you've done dressage before, so you don't want to start from the ground zero. That's one of the exceptions. Then you might be able to start higher up on the ladder. Sometime, and it's not very often, don't think too much on that. You can go straight into international classification for that because you think you've got the skills to start up there. That's a little bit more, not complicated, but there's more of some timelines. You would have to be booked in by a manager 6 weeks before an international competition, because with that, you would have to be booked in at an international show, have a horse. If we go by the rule, you would not have to necessarily ride, only if it's a review, but if you don't ride, you normally don't necessarily have to have a horse, but it's strongly advised to have a horse when you do not. So that just gives you an insight, a little bit of the difference between international and national classification. This little diagram just shows you basically the progression, emerging, development, elite. It's similar to many equestrian programs, whether it's dressage or eventing or whatever it is. We often have that progression. And how do you put people into categories, for instance? At the emerging level, you're going to be competing and you might have scores that are hovering around the 60% benchmark, and that's where you are at national level, of course. Development, you're going to be probably scoring around 64%, and elite, you're going to be already hitting the top of the mountain, and you'll be at 73%. So that just gives you a bit of a vision where to be and what to go for. So the green level below is very accessible because the scores are quite low, but it's obviously to open the door for people that are just starting in part research. And I've put that little picture there of 4 riders, which was taken last summer at the Festival of Champions in Illinois, which is a big dressage show for national riders, and also we have a par dressage class there at the moment, which is a championship for par riders at the national level, but we are using for that the par dressage tests, which are the equivalent of the international 3-star level. And for instance, on that picture, you've got a young girl on the left there who started a few years ago at the emerging level, so she would have used that ladder. But then you have another girl or lady on her left side who is actually a classical example of a rider, an athlete that had an accident, and then she got catapulted very quickly into par dressage and obviously knew how to ride, and she could get quicker into the channel. So she had, historically, she started already from that level because she had ridden before and she had done her classification, but she was an experienced rider and she could go from there. You would not, let's say, be in that elite level right away because you would have to get all the scores basically. But that just gives you an insight. And then the same thing on the right, you have other 2 girls there, which basically both started from the emerging pathway into development level. Your most common level in par dressage with what we do at the moment, I'm going left, is the development level. That's where people are sort of, is the home, is where you are. If you're doing well, you're going to be in that development. And if you do really, really well and you start having results at the 3-star level, then you're going to be getting into the elite. But basically your home base is the development bubble. So let's have a look also at finding a barn and training in dressage and par dressage. And there we've got dressage and par dressage, because just remember, par dressage is nothing else but dressage for athletes that have had either an injury or are born with a disability. You know, there's no different. It's para dressage and dressage is dressage, but in para dressage you've got the ones which have got a disability. But what we are doing and what we are looking for is basically not different. I mean, the judges are actually looking at the same thing. They want to see what the horse is doing underneath the rider, and they will judge the performance of the horse, because that is the ultimate goal, is to have the horse perform under the rider under the best possible harmony. So it doesn't matter which side you're on, basically. So why do we say dressage and para dressage? Because you're going to have to get a trainer. It could be a dressage trainer which has got a little bit of knowledge with para dressage, or it could be a qualified para dressage coach, and we're going to look into that a little bit later. So what we've got at the moment in the US are what we call COEs, Center of Excellence. They're basically barns that are going to be providing the link between the very basic level of, let's say, therapeutic riding into competition. So it's a bit of a bridge between the two, and they're there to get people started. So I've got a list here of what we have at the moment, just to give you an idea geographically where they are, so it gives you access to various places. And we've got, let's say, 2, 4, 8 of them. We've got some in Maine, in Virginia, Maryland, so East Coast, then we've got Texas, California, West Coast, Michigan, obviously the very north, Malvern near Philadelphia, and Perseverance in Virginia. So you can see there is quite a high concentration of them on the East Coast. And in fact, by looking at that list, a lot of them are actually centered around, let's say, between Middleburg and New York, so Maryland, Virginia. One could say, why is that? Well, because it's a very horsey area. I mean, this is the birth of America is basically on the East Coast, around, you know, New York, Washington, Maryland. It's all, the beginning is always been there, so that's where it is, and tradition is there. Don't forget dressage, horses, it's a lot about tradition. It's where it all started, so you're bound to find things there. So, and that's probably why it is. The good thing is that we still have got centers throughout the country. Probably not enough on the west and in the middle, but they are there. So you've got your dressage barn. It's not that you have to go into a COE. I think the COE is an ideal place. Let's say if you've started in your career, you're born with this disability. Very often people will start with a therapeutic center, because that's where you go when you're a young kid, when you do ponies. And that's the same in all the countries.
Let's stop for a second.
Yeah.
I got an idea.
So as you can see on the list, after the series, we've got our dressage barn. The dressage barn are, yes, in essence, more specialized institutions where they have dressage horses, dressage trainers. But it doesn't mean as a para rider you can't go there. Of course you can, because in a dressage barn you can have a coach or a trainer that has got sufficient knowledge on how to train a para dressage horse or a rider. So you can do that. And in fact, there are numerous dressage barns in these countries which have got coaches, in fact, qualified para coaches or pure dressage coaches. So there's nothing wrong with a dressage coach, you know, providing that they have enough knowledge to help you as a para dressage rider. So that's going to be one of your options. Some of the COEs will have actually a strong element of dressage. Some of the COEs have got dressage coaches working in them as well. So if you're lucky to have one of those, you're going to have good backup. So it's a matter of finding a choice for you. Sometimes you're going to be limited with your geographical position. If you only have, let's say, a COE within an hour from you and they don't have a strong emphasis on dressage, well, you're stuck with that, but providing they have some, they will be able to help you. And I think it's one of the criteria with us, with the series, for them to be able to open their centers to what we do. They have to have links around themselves. So if they don't have a resident dressage trainer, they can, you know, get you on to come and help. So it's very important to know that these places can help you whatever level you are within. And then thirdly, we have the path centers. which a lot of you will have heard from, Therapeutic Riding Centers. It's a massive organization in the US. There are well over 700 dispersed everywhere, so you're very likely to have one very close to you. Bear in mind that these centers are essentially tailored for therapy riding. And therapy riding or therapeutic riding doesn't always mean competition. It can mean somebody has had a stroke and they need to go there to get help with their condition, because we know horses are very beneficial for therapeutic purposes. And it could be just what they do. And in fact, I know some places like that in Europe as well. That's all they do, and they don't get involved with the competition. So I think with those, it can work, but you have to do your homework and find out if they are able to provide you with some dressage training. So there are some of them which will have some dressage trainers, and if you're lucky enough to find one of those, they're perfectly capable of helping you, but there are less of them. Right, yes, so I've put that, dressage competition focused, meaning that, yes, if you go to one of those places, you need to ask those questions, can you help me when I'm qualified for that to compete and do the right thing? So have you got the support for that? So now we're going to look at finding an appropriate horse for your grade and skill level. Lovely picture there of the horse and its rider. You can see the bond. So I've put that picture there because basically you've got a power rider who's been basically doing power dressage for roughly 4 years, so not a long time. A nice horse that is her horse, and a power coach that has done our coaching program. So in the US, we have a coaching program to actually channel and fast track dressage coaches into power dressage. Really what it is to get them acquainted with what we do, the rules, and so on. But that's a good example of that combination of a new horse, a new rider, and a new coach that's been trained with us, basically. But I like that picture because of the bond. Dressage and power dressage, it is really a question of also bonding with your horse, because that's what gives you the trust. You need to have a horse that will trust you, so that you have that bond and you have more what I call of a safety aspect. If you have a horse that actually trusts you, you're more likely to be into what I call into a safety bubble. And it's all about that. So it's something we have to discuss, because it doesn't mean that you're going to own that horse. You could have a horse that you're borrowing or leasing from somebody, and then it might be more difficult to bond with the horse because the horse belongs to somebody else, and you might not have access to the horse all the time, and that's a little bit of a question to discuss. So quality in a power horse. Two things. In the long-term development pathway, to get started, you're going to need a horse that's going to give you really the safety and the fun. Always tell people it's got to be fun, it's got to be safe. You're not looking for your Paralympic star, your super flashy, exuberant horse. It doesn't work that way. You've got to learn how to walk before you can run. It's the same in sport. So when you start, you need a horse that's got the right temperament. A horse that is calm. If you do something wrong, it's not going to kill you, it's not going to panic. It's a horse that is relaxed, has got confidence and trust in humans, and it's a horse that's going to be happy around you, whatever you do, whether you scrape your leg on his back when you get on top of your mounting block, whether you do something wrong, you kick the horse and you didn't mean to. So you need that really calm horse. But as soon as you're going to move into something more serious and you start competing, then of course you're going to look for a little bit more, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So you can lease a horse. It happens in all the countries. You've got to do it with a contract, because leasing a horse, it's a very much of a responsibility and a liability. You're engaging with an owner, things could go wrong. So you have to be prepared, and you have to have a contract so that if things go wrong, you're not going to get yourself in trouble. Don't forget, owners of horses are usually very attached to their horses, and if things go wrong, they can suddenly become more defensive about any situation. So just be prepared and do it with a lease or a contract, whatever you want to call it, but with each party's responsibilities. Can I compete aboard horse? So that's one of the advantages in power dressage, even at international level. you can compete aboard a horse, which is a great advantage. Let's put you into the top level in pure dressage at the international level. If you want to compete in the Olympics, for instance, this year we've got the Paris Olympic in 24, the horse owner has to be from the country the horse is competing under. So if you have an American rider with a horse, from January 1st, the horse has to be under American ownership. In Paris dressage, we don't have that because we are allowed to use board horses. So that means you don't have to have a US owner on his passport. It can be somebody from another country, it doesn't matter, which is a bit of a luxury. And it all stems back to our history, back to 1996 at the Atlanta Paralympic Games. People could ride board horses, and in fact, I think in those days, there were something like 3/4 of them were actually board horses. So owners would come with their horses and riders could ride them. And that's why we've taken that along, and we still have it in what we do. And it's a great advantage because you can still compete such a horse. Buy a horse, implications, training, trainer. Implication is basically the responsibility again. Something to maybe not do right away. If you're really starting as an emerging athlete, my advice would be to start really with a board horse or this horse. Or use a horse in a riding center or a riding club or one of those places we were talking about, COEs and so on. Some places of those will have horses you can board. We tend to call them in Europe riding clubs, it's another name, but it's the same. And then if you have access to those horses, they are road tested, I call it. They're normally very well behaved, they know their job and their routine, and it gives you a chance to really learn before you're ready. Don't get a horse too soon because you most likely will change your mind when the horse is not suitable for your requirements at the time. It means you're going to change horses because you're not going to know your requirements when you start in Paris dressage. It's a complicated sport and you need to have a little bit of knowledge before you can go and buy that horse. And if you buy a horse, of course you have to have a trainer because it's a dressage is a sport of three. It's whatever level you normally would have a trainer, yourself, and your horse. But it's also your bubble. We can discuss that later. In fact, when you have a horse, and whether you compete nationally or internationally, you need to have your team around yourself because it is something to prepare. You cannot expect any athletes to go to a competition and not have its backup. Don't expect the others to be doing that for you. It's your job to actually plan for that. So that brings us to talk about the trainer. We've talked about the horse. In fact, before I'm going to go into that, I'm still going to take you back to the previous slide, the horse. So if you're more like this other rider we saw before, you've done dressage before, you've had an accident, you're fine, you've had your classification, you might need a slightly more experienced horse or a horse that's got qualities enough to compete right away in national or international classes. So it would still be the case of having a horse that's got a really good temperament. That is always essential. But then you might need a horse that's got more quality in its paces and so on, so that they can compete under the scrutiny of those top judges. But just bear in mind that it should be tailored to your own need. Always go back to what do I need? Am I capable? Am I able to cope with such a horse? Sometimes if a horse has got too many, let's say, exuberant paces, it might just be too difficult for you to cope. And if you struggle, you're not going to do well. So just bear that in mind. But for me, the essential quality in a power horse, apart from his temperament, is really balance and suppleness. Balance because the horse has got balance, it's up here. I don't believe you can change a horse's balance. If you have a horse that is downhill by nature, you're going to struggle. You can't make miracles in dressage or power dressage. And also suppleness. If your horse is by nature supple, athletic, it's going to be easier. If you have a horse that is stiffer, tighter by nature, it's going to be more difficult. So always look for that. The temperament, number one. Second one is the suppleness or the balance or vice versa. But you need balance, you don't want a horse that's downhill, and you need suppleness. So your coach as well, you have to find your coach. The picture there on the right is actually a good representation, which was taken at the 2018 preparation for the World Games in Tryon, where you've got a rider, a coach, and a mentor coach. Because in any training scenarios, it's always teamwork. That scenario is really a coach teamwork, where you have sometimes a more experienced coach, which is going to be supporting another coach as a backup. So this is what we call a shadowing context, where the mentor or top coach is supporting and mentoring the other coach for the benefit of the rider. So we have a database of power coaches. In the US, we have a power coach program where we train experienced coaches, preferably, to become power dressage coaches. It's a good screenshot of these. If I look at all the coaches there, you probably have, let's say, 3/4 of them are dressage coaches that have learned to become power coaches, and what it means is that they've had to learn about our rules, the grades, a bit of classification as well. And some of them are not in that category. There are some coaches on the pictures which have actually come from the path centers as well. So in that case, they had to concentrate more on their dressage training. But the dressage coaches had to concentrate a little bit on, disabilities, learning about classifications, things like that. So it's either one or the other. I would tend to say that it's normally easier for a dressage coach to be sort of channeled quickly into that pipeline, because they have already a good feel. For them, it's a matter of learning about the athletes themselves and how we can help them, to cope with their physical disabilities. So we have a good database. I think we have roughly, at the moment, 32 qualified coaches. They are scattered also all over the country. A strong concentration of them are on the East Coast. You have access to that on the USEF website. If you go on the Power Dressage portal, go into the first page, in fact, where you have the coaches are listed there. It's a good database, because if you are looking for somebody in a specific area of the country, then you can actually locate them per state and find your coach. So there it would be actually a little bit easier than the COEs or the centers, because those coaches are actually a little bit everywhere. So the certified trainers, we've gone through that. We have got the USEF qualified trainers on the database, but you also have a dressage trainer. A dressage trainer can also help you as well, because if a dressage trainer is not, hasn't got, let's put it that way, qualification as a power dressage coach, it doesn't mean that they haven't got the ability to help you. So it works, and in fact, that coach here on the right hand side of that picture has been one of our top power dressage coaches, and she has been for a long time not qualified power dressage coach. In fact, it's a strong word, because in my mind she was qualified, but she never did the exam to become one of those. So you will have people like that are perfectly capable of helping you, even though on paper they're not qualified, but it doesn't mean they're not. They are actually capable of helping you. So that is a good example. And in fact, that girl there, she did her qualification after the Tokyo Paralympic game and became one of those fast track coaches. Therapeutic riding instructors, you will have these, but as we've discussed before, just make sure if it is one of those, there's a lot of good people out there, but do make sure they have got some dressage knowledge. Otherwise, you're going to struggle, because don't forget what we're doing, what you're going to be doing is dressage. So, you can have a therapeutic riding instructors, but make sure that they have that dressage knowledge. So the pipeline of what you're going to be doing. So when you start, whether it's at the COEs or a therapeutic center, you're going to be going into the competition pipeline by maybe starting with a schooling show at the very basic level. And then you go to national competitions and then your international competitions. So you might ask, yeah, what do? I live out in the sticks, in the middle of the country, in the Midwest, and there's nothing around me, so I'm stuck. Well, we have got options for you. In fact, the first one is USPEA, the Park Restaurant Association, have got a virtual judging program for the national level. They have, in fact, international judges judging those tests. So what it means, you can write a test at home or somewhere else like that, and your test will be judged by one of the judges, and you can get a feedback of what sort of score or marks you're going to be getting. If you're more into an advanced level already, then you can use the USEF virtual judging program, which is going to give you access to most likely the higher level judges, let's say 5-star, which is now we call it the 4-star level. So those are international dressage, part dressage judges, often based in Europe, but not necessarily. There are a couple in this country as well. They're going to be able to help you and give you an assessment of your rights. So those two options are great if you feel you need a good feedback from a top judge, but you can't have access to those judges where you live. You've got to obviously know the rules for your sport. That's any sport, whether it's part dressage or whatever, show jumping, eventing. Make sure you know your rules. Everything is on the web nowadays. If you compete nationally, just check your governing body, which is going to be USEF for yourself, and also USDF, the US Dressage Federation. But with USEF, check the rules. You can check rules as well through both USEF and USPEA. That's just homework basically for that. We've discussed a little bit of that before. You must establish your team for shows, group, assistant coach. You might need a carer. It's something you have to prepare beforehand. And I say that prepare, it means that you need to test it all at home. Don't expect people to do it for you. So when you go somewhere with your team of people to help you, if you have a carer, if you have a coach, just rehearse those scenarios well at home so that when you go to a competition, you're not going to be relying on people there. So you need to practice before going. So your national competition channel, if your aspirations are to do well in national competition, you've got some national opportunities. This is a picture of a national championship for power dressage, which was taken several years ago, in fact in Tron, I think. Before you get to the top level, you will have your USEF, USDF, again, United States Dressage Federation licensed shows. You might have some power dressage test of choice classes. Those are just basically put there by an organizer to give you an opportunity to compete in those classes. Why do they call them tests of choice classes? Because there's not enough power dressage riders in the country. They cannot offer all the tests because there wouldn't be enough participation. So they're just more putting it into one option, and then you just have to designate your test to the organizers, and that's really what it is. At the top level, you've got the Festival of Champions, where you compete your horses in a championship. You've got to qualify there. You go to what we call national qualification shows. You get your scores, and then you qualify for the national championship, which is that part there. The USEF Athlete of Honor Award is basically a big word for the level below, which is your intermediate test level. So when you learn your test, you have novice and intermediate test. Intermediate test is just for the level below the top level of the Festival of Champions. So if you're not quite there yet, you are going to be able to compete at that level. Again, the national championship is that picture there. Rules can change. You might have a champion for the overall classes, or you might have, if we had enough people in this country, you would end up with a champion for each grade, which some countries do, but we're not quite there yet because we haven't got the numbers. So, I'm not going to tell you it is the case now, but in the future it might happen when we start having more people. So if you are moving from your national level into the international opportunity, this is a picture from a show abroad, which took us far east in Doha, Qatar. It's an interesting picture because on these photographs, again, you have two riders which actually have, succeeded to get into that international zone quite quickly, within 3 years. I think those two girls there have been channeled from the start within 3 to 4 years into international shows. And it just shows you that it is really possible. If you've got the horse and the talent, you can get there. And how it works is that you have your two lower levels at international events, 1 and 2 star, and then you have your 3-star level, which is the Grand Prix test. Now the requirements to enter the 3-star are governed by the FEI. You have got to do the 1 and 2-star level and get the scores to compete in 3-star, basically. It's just to make sure that people are not jumping in too quickly into it. And the scores are not very high, it's very much accessible, but it's just to make sure that people are taking their time and doing that first. At the very top level, then we have the World Championships, which gathers people from all over the world. And the very top level is the Paralympic Games, which is basically the icing on the cake of the very top competition, which gathers all the countries in the world at the very top level. So I hope that we will see you there one day. Why not? And this is a vision you always have. In sport, always look for the top. That's where I want to go. If you have the right support, the right horse, and your skills and your hard work, there's always a road to success, and we would love to see you there one day.
Alrighty, what are some of the common documents you need at a horse show?
Documents. Super important that you understand what you need in order to present yourself at a competition and be ready and get the gold star that Ellie talked about. So we want you to be successful when you get to the show office, because that's going to set you up for success for the entire rest of the weekend. So in order to do that, there are a couple things that you need. Every competition will have a federation entry agreement that is from the USCF, any competition that you're entered in the United States. That document is going to need to get signed by the owner, the rider, the trainer, and the coach, if you have one, and then get turned into the competition. Those are unique to every single competition, so you use it for one show, and then you'll need to create another one for the next show that you enter. In addition to that, there's a waiver and a release of liability. Those are the two documents that you need for every single show that you're going to enter. Beyond that, we have requirements for proof that your horse is vaccinated. That's according to USCF GR 844, which outlines the flu and rhino vaccinations that your horse needs to have at least once every 6 months, and identifies how you need to prove that your horse has received those vaccinations. Even if you're not in the competition season, my recommendation to you is to keep your horse on a vaccination schedule that you're able to plan and follow, and that way you're never chasing it when it comes time to competition, that your horse is actually ready to go. Other requirements, depending on where you're at, they might vary regionally, but one of the common ones is proof of negative EIA, negative equine influenza. That is commonly known as the Coggins test, which needs to be done once every 12 months, and you need to have proof that your horse is negative for Coggins to enter most competition grounds when you're traveling from state to state. So that's another one that you should keep in mind as well. If you're competing internationally, if you're going to enter into FEI level competitions, you're also going to have an FEI passport for your horse. Inside of that is a documentation place for vaccinations that you also need to document in addition to what you do for USCF national level competitions. You should work with your veterinarian and make sure that you have all of the documentation that you have for each one of the vaccination requirements completed before you enter a competition, because you're going to need that in order to compete at the FEI level event that you're applying to.
Perfect.
All right.
All right. That's good.
Hello, my name is Noah Ratner, and I am a Level 5 dressage organizer for the United States Equestrian Federation. I'm also a USCF Level 3 show secretary. I also serve as an announcer for all of the major international competitions at the Global Dressage Festival and at Tryon International Equestrian Center and the Desert International Horse Park, in addition to managing numerous shows and events all across North America and in particular in the United States.
Great, welcome Noah. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have a few questions for our beginning para riders. And here are some basic things. Entering your first horse show, what are some things you can do to get a gold star from your show management?
That is a loaded question. So I think the first thing is to be as aware of yourself as you can. As a venue owner that owns a competition venue that hosts licensed competitions that offer para dressage classes alongside dressage classes, the biggest and best thing that you can do as a para dressage rider is to be direct with what your needs are as a rider in what's going to allow you to be successful and also to level the playing field. When we think about para dressage, we think about you being in a parallel sport and parallel to dressage sport. And so whatever we need to do to support you as an organizing committee, as an organization, we want you to be successful. We want you to be on the same level as a dressage rider. And so in order to do that, we need to understand what your needs might be. Sometimes we'll be able to accommodate those once we know what they are. Other times, there are things that we might not have the local infrastructure to be able to do. Oftentimes, you know that horse shows take place in dirt and it rains and there might be mud and there might be limitations as far as what we can actually do to make the environment the exact need that you have in order to be successful. But we absolutely want to give you the best opportunity to have success with your horse in competition, regardless of what classes you're entered in a show. So be direct with what you need from the organizer from the get-go. That means don't wait to enter the show until the very last minute. A lot of competitors that enter our horse shows will wait until the very last day that the show is closing before they send their entries. That doesn't give an organizer usually enough time to make any kind of changes or any infrastructure level changes that they're going to need in order to give you a better shot at a successful competition. So the earlier that you can communicate your needs, the better likelihood you are going to have that we'll be able to accommodate you.
And what is show management required to do, and what is the athlete's responsibility?
The show management is required to offer you everything that's outlined in the USCF rulebook. We need to offer to have living letters when there's a need for it. We need to accept your dispensation certificate and fully understand what the limitations are if you have limitations or if you have other accommodations that have been made per your dispensation. We need to know what those are and be able to get a copy with sufficient time to the ring steward, to the show office, and to the official and or officials that are judging you during the competition. We also need to know if we need to have enlarged letters, and we need to know if we're going to need to make any changes to the actual arena within the specifications of the rule book. Beyond that, there are no real additional accommodations that are outlined for para dressage athletes. So if you need ramps or if you need specific structures that are going to allow you to have an easy mounting on or dismounting, those are all things that generally you would need to provide. There are some venues that were built or were established more recently that might have infrastructure in place that will allow you to utilize equipment that is already on site, but never assume that that is already there. Always come prepared so that you can make yourself successful and know that the responsibility of the organizer is to have the show environment and have the arena set up, and beyond that, it's basically very plain and grassroots. Everything else is your responsibility as a rider.
Okay. And if you're planning on riding your first freestyle, what additional things do you need to provide show management with?
Freestyles in general, there's not a whole lot of difference between dressage and para dressage as far as freestyles go. The biggest thing that you need to understand is your sound check. You need to make sure that you've turned in your freestyle music to the organizer or to the announcer, however they've indicated in their prize list. that they have your music either electronically or if they specify another way that they want you to send their music. For example, some of the software companies that do scoring for shows now also offer a music uploading mechanism, and that allows you to upload your music onto their platform rather than bringing a CD or a thumb drive. Once you've done that, send an email to the show organizer and confirm that they've actually received your music. A lot of times, files that were made yourself or that were made by an organization that doesn't produce music professionally, they won't know how to compress the files, and so the files end up being massive audio files that aren't able to be emailed and usually end up just waiting in your email outbox. So check to make sure that the organizer has actually received your music, and then find out when the actual sound check is going to take place. Every horse show for every freestyle class that's offered is required to offer a musical freestyle sound check. At that point, you or a representative for you needs to go to the sound check, and they need to actually know what they do when they get there. So during the sound check, the announcer or the audio technician, whoever is running your music during the freestyle, they will pull up your music and they will play your music at whatever their neutral level is. From there, whoever is representing you as the athlete or you yourself will need to indicate whether you want your music to go louder or whether you want it to go quieter. Once you get to the point where you're happy with your music and it sounds good and you know that your horse isn't going to be reactive at that level, then you want to tell the audio engineer or the announcer that everything is good and you're set to go at that level. They will mark whatever that level is, and that's what level your freestyle will be played at during a competition. One of the important pieces, though, is that you want to make sure that your music is able to be heard regardless of where you are in the arena. So at some venues, they have limitations as far as where the speakers are placed. So you want to make sure that you take note of where the speakers are, go very close to the speaker and hear how loud that is, and then go to the furthest point away from the speaker within the dressage court to make sure that you can still hear it, and that also when you're closest to the speaker, when it's going to be the loudest, that it's not going to disturb or scare your horse. A lot of times people want their music as loud as possible, or they have some track that they really, really like, and it's exciting pop music or modern music, and they want the music as loud as possible. But be practical and think about it, and remember that your horse has to be able to get through the test, and that your music shouldn't interfere with your ride.
All right, and then if you're entering your first CDI, what additional stuff do you need to provide to your show manager?
When it comes to CDI, an international dressage competition, or for the para dressage riders, a CPEDI, you need to understand that that is the international level of competition. So we have national level competition, those are called CDN, or a national dressage competition. And then we also have the CPEDI, which is the international or the FEI recognized level of sport for para dressage. Those two things are completely different because the CDN, the para dressage on a national level, are regulated by the U.S. Equestrian Federation. So those all fall under our national rule book, and those are the rules that are in play. So when you're competing in a USEF, a national level show, you need to provide the organizer with a copy of your dispensation certificate. That document, like I said before, is transferred then to the ring steward, who is looking at any equipment modifications or enhancements that you might be allowed to have. And then it's also given to each one of the judges that's officiating during your test. So that's for USEF national level competition. In international level competition, you're classified as a rider at one of the grade levels. And all of that information is on file with the FEI, which is the International Equestrian Federation. Those two organizations generally do not cross on many of the items that you need from a national level competition to an international level of competition. So it's very important that if you're going to be an international level rider and you're entering national level shows for any other reason, whether it's to get to the national championships or it's to go to qualify to represent the country internationally, you need to understand which type of competition you're at. When you compete at a USEF show, the dispensation certificate that you receive from the USEF is the only document that is relevant. Unfortunately, the document that you get from the FEI that specifies what grade level you are and any modifications or enhancements that you're allowed to have at your grade level, that is unique and only applicable in FEI level competition. So it's really important that you distinguish which competition type you're in so that you submit the documents that are relevant. It doesn't necessarily hurt you to submit both documents, but it's important to understand which ones apply to which entities so that you have the right documents for the right shows. And Always be sure that you submit those documents with your entries at the time that you enter the show. Please don't wait until you get to the show to hand over those documents. We know that things change. We know that you might be getting reclassified at a show, and that might overlap a time when you're entering another show. But send what you've got when you submit your entry, and that way the organizer can start to process that information and check the box that your entry is complete.
And what volunteer opportunities are available at shows?
We have so many volunteer opportunities that really we just need somebody to raise their hand. You don't necessarily need to worry about what constraints you might have. There's absolutely a job for you at every single one of our shows. Whether it's being a ring steward, you can be in a stationary position, just checking people off as they come into the warm-up arena and as they leave the warm-up arena, using a radio to communicate to let the announcer know or let the gatekeeper know in the competition arena that you're sending somebody over. There might be tasks that are as simple as labeling tests or pulling tests for the next day's worth of competition. We have opportunities in the show office sometimes, including scoring. So if they're using paper score sheets, there might be an opportunity for you to assist with paper scoring. There are countless opportunities. We just need people to be involved. So making sure that the organizer knows that when you're not competing, that you're available and you're willing to help.